Hello and welcome to Conversations in Close Protection with your hosts Chuck Randall and Chris Story. Our goal is to engage the greater protection community, inspire innovative thought, and as always, continue the conversation around all things close protection.
This is Conversations in Close Protection. My name is Chuck Randolph. Across the digital divide, the aromatic, Mr. Chris Story. Wake up.
Yeah, I think as long as it's not aromatic, I'm cool with it.
Could be. I don't know. Did you just work out?
No, no, that's in a little bit. I don't want to be known as SpongeBob Stinky Pants,
I
or
mean, you're
Sour
aromatic.
Pants.
I think you're aromatic. You're also sour pants. So, I mean,
Yep, fair enough. Fair enough. How's your week?
uh, well, I mean, the week has been crazy, just like I think everyone else. I think, we're all dealing with the assassination culture that seems to be taking hold. And, even the post Charlie Kirk stuff. I mean, you saw that. I don't know if you saw, Chris. I didn't have time to text you about it, but there was a website that popped up. It went down. Another one popped up that went down. I mean, we saw that earlier. Post Mangione. We saw that post Vance Bolter. I mean, it. Fred Bird would tell us we've seen this all before, but now we're seeing it in a social media fueled environment. So it's uh,
Right.
it's sporty, as you would say. What about
Yeah,
you?
I think yeah, same thing. I think as soon as that happened, I felt like I felt a shift, right? Like now this is a trend, and I mean it's not a trend. It's a tactic that and a strategy that we need to be
It
very,
is a growing
take very,
trend that
very
is turning it.
seriously, right?
It's a
Right?
growing trend that now has legs. I mean,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
I don't know if you read it, but I have a Substack called Vigilia, which is about security and stuff like that. And I wrote like a three-part series back after the Bolter thing that I called the kill chain. And it's one of those you hate it when you're right because that stuff is now hyper escalating. People are finding people. There's, like I just said, the doxing incidents. And, as soon as that happens too, I will say one thing that I was encouraged by is so many people that came out and said, hey, we really need to get back to a place where we as a society can talk and try to work these things out. But I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. And even for the
Yeah.
protectors too, it's even more difficult for the protectors when you're planning. I mean, let's take all the politics outside of this. I mean, you and I were talking before you even turned the mics on. Like, look, open air is hard enough as it is. And then now you add in this proclivity, if you will, of, yep, political violence seems to be more something that is part of somebody's, especially the extremist palette.
Well, I don't think we say take politics out of it and then say political violence is a thing, right? I think across the
No, I
board,
mean
it's
when you're
been,
pla-
it's
when
been,
you're playing from a pure planning point of view, when we sit back and look at it, I mean, like you and I were saying, like, look, open air is hard.
yeah. But I think what we are seeing is, um, that's one of the domains, right? Is politics. And so I think that, as commercial protectors, we haven't really necessarily had to face that level of risk that was directed toward your principal because that's usually a government domain, right? Or a government space. So now
Well,
it's kind of
I'd almost
shifting into that.
I'd almost say, if you will, I would offer instead of saying politics is a domain, I'd couch that under the narrative domain. Because what what does your principal represent? What does their organization represent? Where do they fit into that? And then there's the
Yeah,
political aspect of that. Like my personal politics, does it, we're in this thing where like tastes great, less filling, and it's so existential that if if you're not with me, you're against me.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think we could. That's probably a conversation for another day, like that, because in that piece is like, what is your principle evoke from an emotional standpoint, and that kind of like goes into it, at least from my perspective, activist domain. But that's neither here nor there, right? We're getting into the the
We
the season where governors are getting ready to be elected, right? That round two,
Mhm.
and if you are not currently a governor, you're not protected, right? Like you have to come up with your own protection. So or if you're not, sorry, and not a current elected official that has security already assigned, and then so you have to come up with your own protective detail, and what does that look like, right? And so where for the longest time, again going back to the less filling tastes great, like hey, is it soft skills, is it hard skills? And our argument was like it's both. What does that look like? Because you know your tactical skills all the way up to and front, from observation, defense in depth, response in depth, uh, you know, protective surveillance, all of that comes into play where a lot of folks um, um, don't have to deal with that because they don't do open air, or they don't do large events, or they're not working with somebody who evokes some such level of emotion. I think that you know this shit just got real for those who have been pretending for a little bit, right? Those who have been like, "Hey, I'm
well,
an EP guy, but we don't have any risk," and blah 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 blah. And I have no background. I came from X, right? Now it's going to be very very difficult for us, for not for us, but for that for that to make that leap of what if and if then, right? And I
I
think that
think
that has to be given a nod, if you will.
one thing to add to that would be, yep, we're coming up on people, a new election, and election season, and something to think of, when we have these incidents like a Charlie Kirk or Brian Thompson, all these things, is the first thing you need to think about also is like, where does my principal sit on this? Again, it's not your or my political statement, it's where do they sit on this narrative? And the other thing too is
Well,
like, are they giving money to a political campaign? Who wouldn't like that? I mean, so that goes back to some protective intelligence where, like, tell me what's being said online. Tell me what's happening fringe wise, because you're absolutely right. Chris could be running for governor and Chuck is one of his main supporters. Well, they can't get Chris because Chris has .le, and whether it's good or not, my perception is, well, I don't want to go after that. I'll go after Chuck. That's an easier target, and I can still make a statement.
right. What you bring up, but you also bring up a good point though too, is that both of the recent, well, most prolific attacks have had security, right? Like
Yeah,
like one had former presidential level security at the Secret Service level, right? And on top of that had candidate protection, and that there was still an attempt made, right? This time, this person had protection, and still, the attempt was made and completed. So I think that there has to be some significant evaluation of programs. But if then, like you talked about, what are the threat domains that we face? What are the risks within that? What is our narrative? Because you can't expect your principal to change their narrative based on like, hey, well, this might be a bad thing, right? They have to kind of stay true. And then, like you said, what will become of that for those people who don't agree with that? Because your former organization did a bunch of case studies or surveys on this that says you're going to be judged regard whether you say something or if you don't say something, and whatever you say, there's going to be opposition to it that'll target you because of that. And I think a lot of this
internal
is,
and external.
yeah, we would
So I
call it
mean,
like filtering, right?
we'll
You
save
can
the
you can
insider threat conversation for another day.
Yeah. So I think that's the challenging piece now, is that no longer is it rhetoric, but we're seeing this building trend where the idea is to get someone to do something about it.
Well, now, and let's just pin that for a second, because I know there's probably folks watching and listening and like, yeah, that's great. Let's talk tactics for a minute. And you and I, if you go back and listen to I mean, how many years have we been doing this? Couple. if you go back and listen to a bunch of our episodes, you've listened more than, more than a few. I mean, we advocate defense in depth. Like this, I understand the arm's length and all that stuff, but the reality is now we're seeing ranged weapons and things part of the mix again. So, and that, by the way, that's not us saying, hey, let's get counter sniper stuff and this and that. That, like, reality is you've got to figure out how to push that defense out. You've got to, you and I the other day were talking about what we learned from the military, an LPOP.
The reality is that no jurisdiction in their right mind is going to have a bunch of yahoos with long guns on rooftops that aren't law enforcement, right? Like,
Chris,
that's never going to happen.
I was a sniper in the military. They don't care.
Yeah, that's not happening.
What was it back on the IPSB? I don't know, like maybe 6 years ago. I remember we had an attorney on the stage, and her comment was, "All I'm seeing is more lawsuits I'm going to throw at somebody." But how do you then? I mean, what do we learn in the military? You and I were, I think, texting about LPOPs. Listening posts, observation posts. You almost advocating for someone that's their only job is to observe, like observe in depth, and be on overwatch for potential issues.
Right, and then direct someone to move and disrupt those. Right.
Chris, decades ago, when I had my own business doing EP, one of my clients at the time was former Notre Dame coach Lou Holtz. By the way, great man, probably one of the best principals I ever had. I can't say enough positive things about the guy. But we would occasionally get people that would try to throw footballs or something at him. One never knows what goes on in someone's mind. But I had to put basically an LPOP out that all they were doing is looking for people that were looking to like toss something or do something so that we could kind of be on the lookout for, because at the time it all escalated from someone threw a football. I wish I could say, oh, I meant to do that, but I swatted it away. I mean, it was a big, arm movement. I hit the ball, swatted it away, would have hit him in the head. That probably would have been the end of that, contract for us. But for me, that moment of setback was a stark reminder that, oh, that could have been anything. It could have been could have been a rock, could have been anything. So we instituted that everywhere we went, because a lot of places we're in were arenas, and you have a large avenue of approach. I think these incidents are going to make us rethink about the way we're doing the advance and the way we're setting things up. So maybe instead of 6 people right there near the X, we've got 4 people and we've got 2 people pushed out. I mean, you're learning on protective surveillance. How does this change that as well?
Well, I think protective intelligence and surveillance become very, very important, right? So that you can understand what you're walking into. Well, protective intelligence, protective surveillance, and the site survey prior to your advance, and then of course your advance. I think all of those come into play, and then you also have to have the ability to adjust the event based on those risks, to reduce the amount of exposure, right? Now, which is challenging because if your role is exposure, right, or if your principal's role is exposure, right, how do you reduce that to an effect where you still allow for that but maintain the tactical advantage, right? The next piece is that defense in depth is active, not passive. So that protective surveillance piece is that your team is supposed to be hunting for those behaviors that don't fit the baseline, right? Those behaviors that cause your eyebrow to raise up, to go, hey, what the 5 W's, the who doesn't really matter, but what is that person? Why are they doing it? And how do I identify that outside of that so I can disrupt it? Whatever it is, right? As far away from the event as possible. And I think the important thing is that, what am I doing to change the trajectory, right? And
Yep.
I would venture to guess if we were to look at these, and it looked to me like at least at this event there's some level of protective intelligence going on. Like, hey, who are always the people that are coming to the front? Are they the same people that were here at the last event or whatever the case is?
Yep.
These are all things that need to be looked at, and the reality is that B word is going to start really dictating what happens, and the B word is budget. It gives people a really really good idea of what they're supposed to be doing, or how they should approach it. I'm sure you're dropping gold right now, but you're muted, my friend.
Best thing that happened all day. Um, just a couple random thoughts as we sit here, drinking some coffee over to the digital divide and discussing this. One is the sector sketch comes to mind, which is a low tech way, to walk in. And I've done these before on details where, hey, what do we have? Map it out. Show me where they are. What's my, what's the distance that I need to worry about? Let's draw a line around that and let's mark all these points. So even if you have someone out doing protective surveillance, you can note to them like, these are the, like we're concerned about these places, or we have a concern about these places. I need to make sure that we're looking at this. And then also, part of that marks where escape routes are, and all part of the advanced work. People might have different cool names for them and then try to copyright it for whatever book or training thing they're doing. But at the end of the day, I think I go back to you and I as young soldiers, and you're like, what's my sector sketch? What am I
Yeah,
concerned
well,
about? I have this
I mean, the thing
tree,
is,
or
you
I
can
have
do
this
this
thing out
with,
there.
yeah, you can do this with Google Earth. They've got
Yeah.
you've got distances. You can show
Yeah.
line of sight. You can do all this stuff at least with your pre-work.
But it was, yeah.
Identify suspected dead zones. Make a grid, and then you're not going like, "Hey, the thing by the tree that does the this." You go,
Yeah.
"No, hey, Alpha 6. Somebody needs to move to Alpha 6 or something happening. Or let me get eyes on Alpha 6. What is happening there? Great.
And,
What's going on Bravo 32? Like
and
again, make it easy.
this is low. I mean, yeah, this is tech, but it's low tech, low cost. This is not
Low
like,
time,
yeah.
low
Now
time,
the
and
other,
high professionalism. You know?
yeah, I mean, so that's the first thing that came to mind is like, you kind of go back to some of the, you kind of get back to some of the basics, like, and then the other thing that came up to me randomly though, Chris, is like, if because I had a detail once where I was going to all these arenas, we would kind of always look at and this is back in, the late 90s. So AI, all these things weren't what they are today. I mean, or didn't exist. Imagine now the ability, just you're at something where it's like, hey, we're going to be at multiple sites. I have a principal who's doing speeches all around, and I just start videoing the crowd. We can probably take that back. We can probably ingest that into an AI engine and say, tell me, is there anything that's similar here? Of course, there's probably going to be a ton of anomalies, but that's why you have intel folks and people who can be a human in the loop and identify, yep, we see the same person or we don't. Because I think you
Yeah,
bring a good point. And now we're not saying that person's bad. We're just creating a bolo because we
yeah.
have question.
And I think the other thing it does is it really creates the threat assessment as a driver, right? I think a
Yeah.
lot of times as of late,
Chuck
like,
Tobin just said, I've been saying this for years.
yeah, well, so I think so first off, the threat has to be identified and assessed appropriately, right? It can't, so first off, your EP team is an enabler, right? Like again, Charlie Kirk, great example, right? High threat environment. Doesn't really matter where he was. He had a lot of threats directed at him, right?
Right.
And specific threats. So he was a high threat individual, right? A high risk, if you will.
High risk. Yeah.
So so that you have to have the appropriate risk treatment for that to bring the reduce down to the most effective risk mitigation levels, so that you're aligned with what you're doing. And if you can't, then you have to rework the plan, add more resources, et cetera, or you have to accept that risk sandwich, right? So I think that's the biggest piece. I think whereas a lot of folks their threats aren't necessarily kinetic, right? They don't go to that
Right.
first principle of protection. That now you have to reassess your program to figure out if that's where you're landing or not. And then
And
you
I
have to
think
be
you're
able to
right.
articulate why or why not your measures are good enough.
And this is why I'm also a fan of, again, threat informed, intelligence driven, operations led. That threat informed piece. Where are we today? A threat assessment is a living document. It's not something you dust off every 3 years and say, yep, we're good. I mean, you have to constantly be looking at it and adjusting it. Because you're right. It's going to inform the data points that are going to ultimately help the team on the ground say, this is why we're doing this. So if the boss says, why are we doing this? Because of X.
Mm-hmm.
Because like you said, we're not willing to accept the risk sandwich, or we have to, but if we know we have to eat it, well, let's at least make it a little more easier to swallow and a little more safe for us in the best that we can. I mean, sometimes I feel like we've got to be careful that we don't do, and I know we joke like, let's do it live, but I think we need to be careful and not do it live where we don't have to.
Right.
Like you just
Yeah.
said,
I mean,
there are ways like Chris, Chuck, we don't, there are ways to have a quick look, Google Earth, other things, where at least you can have an idea and eyes on and what are we doing. And, but we do understand there are times when the boss might say, hey, we're going to go here. And you go, Roger that, ma'am. And there's some randomness to it. And you gotta roll with what you have. But I think
yeah.
with what we're seeing recently too, like don't, don't bet on always doing it live, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah. I think what this really drives back to is, you know, you can't do it live. You've got to rehearse. You got to train. You've got to rehearse. You've got to understand what's going on. A great example. Again, those two recent examples, right? You have the Secret Service,
Mm-hmm.
who was considered the pinnacle of protection, right? Of delivery, and we saw what that looked like, right? Whether it's DHS, whoever it was not what was. It did not deliver what
Right.
was expected from a professional lens. You see this other thing, right? Again, failure, and yet the at least with some of the video you could see there were rehearsals that were executed. Like there wasn't chaos. It was
Right.
grab, go, execute, move, do the things, right? And
Yep.
everybody could Monday morning quarterback about the whys and or whys or why nots or blah blah blah, right? And everybody tries to freaking stake their little claim on whatever it is. However, I think where this really is important is that as a client, speaking from a client lens, like we've seen a trend where we'll pay for advances and then we know the advance is not done because somebody just checks a box, right? They'll go drive the routes and they'll go look at the entrance, but that's the end of it. They have no idea where you go once you go in, whatever the case is, and whether that's laziness or they believe that the advance only concerns their routes or the routes. That's a challenge,
Chris,
right? And so now
getting out
we're
of
we're putting
getting out of the car
controls
and
in
walking
place
in,
to be able
getting
to
out of the
execute
car and
that.
walking the route, man, that's boring, man. Nobody wants to do that.
Yeah, but that's what you get paid for. You
Now,
know,
but there's a
and
that
EP
brings up
should be
another
boring. Hello,
but
EP should
that
be
brings up
boring.
another really good point though. If you take it from a leader's point of view, because I know we have plenty of CSOs that listen to this show and in writing give us comments. There's a compliance, I said it, there's a compliance factor to this as well, which is, are you meeting these internal guidelines in our internal protocol standards, whatever you want to call them, to do this stuff?
Mm,
But, and then how do you, I mean, there's a whole another nut to crack there. How do you prove it, this, that? But at the end of the day, as a leader, I think it behooves you, even if you don't come from a protective background, to ask questions like, what kind of advances are we doing? What are we looking at? Can you walk me through it? Can you show me? And even to the point to where if it's a large event and you know it's there, you should show up and walk the ground with the team and ask them to show you what's going on.
yeah, yeah. I think that. Well, I know for a vendor, I just have to hit him where it hurts, right? Hey, this wasn't done.
Yep.
The guy clearly didn't execute, so I'm not paying for that day, or I'm going to pay
Well,
50% or 25% of what I got out of that day.
and
You know?
and it's, and it in contractually and and through procurement and all that too, there's a whole nother way in which you can say like, now what are the SLAs? What do we need? Have we met them? All that stuff. But again, I mean, protection, we're not quite at a year, but I mean, we're going to be at a year soon of just the year of activism and protection being in the spotlight. And I feel like we're changing, but I'm not sure we're changing fast enough. I literally, I don't want to date the podcast, but I just put up a blog last night talking about Fur's Wheels law of accelerating returns from tech, and then the Red Queen effect of you've got to keep moving or you've got moving, you got to keep moving or you die in order to advance. And I worry a little bit like, are we moving fast enough?
Yeah, I think that the one more and the value of the protective detail will be challenged, right?
Yep.
Because protection is an enabler, right? So you can't just go, oh, well, we can't go anywhere, right? Because of that, right? No, the reason I have a 6-person, seven, whatever the size detail you have, at least at your event, right? That's so that I can do the event, and not do the event, you know.
Yep.
I think the other thing is that it's going to have to help prevent some technology that's, I'm sorry, introduce some prevention technology that says, hey, like, look, if we're going to do an open air event, then here's what it looks like, you know, and it, just the sign of the times, right?
Well, and it also, something you were talking about earlier, I want to come back to is like this also, many protectors kind of live in that like, hey, I can't tell you, we're doing something. I'll let you know when I need to know. But I think especially when you're covering down on an event, and let's be honest, a lot of protection stuff happens at an event,
Mm-hmm.
and event security and close protection are first cousins, and they need to embrace each other in terms of like joint efforts. So if you're covering down on an event, let them know this is what I'm thinking about. What are you thinking about? How do we, just don't show up and try to be, one man or one person national asset. You've got,
Yeah, yeah,
you've got to bring people in to the fold when you can and read them out when they're done, because they are going to be your tertiary eyes and ears. Because you can't do it
yeah. And
all. That's
I think,
reality. You can't do it all.
yeah, there's two
You can't
types of
check your
events, right?
phone, check the principal, check the cars, get a cup of coffee. You can't do it all.
Yeah. There's two types of events. There's your event and our event, right? And you've
Yeah.
got to be able to leverage and control those as much as possible. And your event should be, I mean, our event should be locked down depending if it's internal and external, right? There are those, each of them have the different nuances, but your event that you've invited me to, then you have a little bit of responsibility within that, right? Like, so I go, hey,
Yep.
here's the threat that we're facing. Here's what we need, right? What threats are you guys hearing about and associated with this, and how do we come to a conclusion to sort that out? Again, I think people want to go, oh, we got this, right? We don't allow anybody into our fold, right? And I think that's, you need those force multipliers to help extend that perimeter as far as possible and to help manage that defense in depth.
And you're right. There's your event, my event, and our issue.
Yeah, they both become our issue, right? Because at my event,
Yep.
I worry about my principal, but I also have to understand what you and your principal are bringing to my event, and I share what my security controls are, so that you can work uh, your detail within that. And if you need to add some of those, then we work to execute that at least for the duration while you're there. Then I can either collapse it or extend or expand it based on whoever's coming next, right? And I think those things are very, very, very important to note.
Colin, I think this also, you know, these actions that we saw, Charlie Kirk, Vance Bolter, all the way back to Mangione, executives, boards, organizations are going to keep asking, like, one, why is this still happening? What can we do to prevent it? And there's everyone can talk about political extremism, activism, and the why, and go back to what did FBI Director Christopher Wray call it a couple of years ago: salad bar extremism. But at the end of the stick, there is that protection agent, there's that protection team, there's that event security team, whatever label you want to call yourself, that has to deal with the on ground realities of I have limited budget and I got to get a lot done.
Mhm.
So, like you said, what's the sandwich that we're willing to eat? What's the one we're not? And this kind of goes back to now communication of the risk to the CSO, to the event planner, to the boss, to whoever that bill payer is that says, this is why we need to do this. I mean, what are you thinking in terms of like having those conversations now for, hey, I need a little bit of budget increase. I need a little bit more here. I need to do that. As opposed to just saying, Chris, I need more guys. I need
Yeah,
more
that's the
bodyguards.
biggest piece, right? And this is the part where
See how
we
I teed
want
that
to
up
be
there?
part of the business, right? And then you have to have a business case. You can't. I mean, on one hand, we say never let a crisis go. What is the term? Never let a good crisis go
Um, unused or something. Yep.
unused, if you will. Right, right, right. But at some point, like the part where you've got to be able to articulate this is that as soon as it's out of mind, some bean counter is going to go, well, you don't need this, right? We're reducing everybody's budget. You got to pull this out, right? So
I
you really
call
have
it
to
the,
show the why, right?
yep.
And I don't
That's
mean you
the
have to go,
three.
hey, because there's snipers here and snipers here. I don't mean the tactical, that uber tactical approach. I mean, you need to show in terms of risk why you're doing what you're doing, right?
I call it the
Then
three
you're able
quarter
to
approach.
educate.
I call that the three
Yeah.
quarter approach. 3 quarters after the incident, if we haven't built, by the way, we're not saying make stuff up, but if you
No.
haven't, like, okay, look, you can take something like Charlie Kirk and go, oh my God, and now everybody's, like you said, Monday morning quarterback, this, that, this, that. The first thing you should be asking if you're in an organization is this possible to happen here? What are our data points? What do we need to show up right now? And what's the conversation that we need to start having with, insert key internal external partner here? Because you're
Yeah.
absolutely right. Hey, why are we doing this? Because the narrative is this happened, we aligned this way. So until we believe that the threat, needle has cooled, or whatever, metric term we want to use, this is why we're doing this.
Yeah. And
Okay,
I think
great.
it
As
goes
opposed
to
to, we're worried about snipers. Okay.
right, right. And it goes back to really, it goes back to threat, right? Who's making what threats? Because the sniper is situational, right? If you never do
Mm-hmm.
anything in outdoors, then as soon as you say I'm gonna
Yeah,
take you out like so and so did with Charlie Kirk. Well, I don't go outdoors, so
great.
what? That's not even a.
Then
I mean,
then
that's a threat,
then
but
nobody saw the truck careening across the sidewalk to run into the
right,
principal, or nobody
right,
saw,
right. So
the
we don't.
determined assailant will figure out a way or continue to ideate until they do something or show up at
Right.
somebody's door. And we
So
we
the
can
the
spend a
threat
whole nother
vector,
podcast about ad tech.
yeah, the threat vector becomes the threats themselves, right?
Yep.
and and who's getting threats. So, for example, if you have a principal whose profile doesn't rise to that level of occasion, then what's the next threat that you will likely face? You will likely face folks who stand on one side of the aisle or other, who are upset at what your principal did or didn't do or didn't
Mm-hmm.
say, and that'll usually come in terms of some level of harassment, right? And so that's the vector that you need to focus on. Is that okay? Great, we're not worried about snipers because our profile doesn't go that high, but what are we worried about? We're worried about this, you know, quasi internal threat where there's friction, either internally or externally, about what's going on. Great example. Okay, so I work for well, it's on LinkedIn. So I work for Marvell, right?
All right.
Jimmy Kimmel got uh, I guess the term is canceled, and so we had a protester one outside who couldn't spell because he thought that we were Marvel, as in the comics, and that he wanted to protest Jimmy Kimmel's being fired. And so he stood out there with a bullhorn and an extended middle finger, yelling at everybody as they were going into the office because he thought we were, you know,
And the reality of that is, and I've experienced that exact thing many times when I was back at Microsoft, and people would show up because And I know people listening in right now are like, man, Chris, that's crazy. It is. But that's the one thing you don't know about the threat
That's
is
the
at
whole
the end of the
idea.
day, you don't know that individual may actually
Yeah.
perceive that his or her television is talking to them. Their
Right.
hallucination is their reality, which is
Right.
what makes that scary is now in terms of asymmetric or something. Now here's something out of left field because somebody's like you said, it's funny because I thought you were Marvel, part of DC, but reality is now we have potentially a very bad situation because
It's a
of
third.
misinterpretation.
It's a third order effect, or I'm sorry, second order
Yeah.
effect, because of that misinterpretation that makes you an unwitting target, right?
Yeah.
And that you might never see or might never make the connection until you start looking at where your threats are coming from in the digital space, right? Or the mail or whatever the case is. So this is why those threat vectors need to be monitored, right? Where are my harassing emails coming from? What does that look like? Am I being doxxed or swatted? Like what are those things? Who's the driver behind that, and what can the
Yeah.
result be specifically through that misinformation piece? I think the Mangione list is a great, and I hate using his name all the time, but the list that was created after the Thompson murder is a great example because those folks, right, or those cards, if you can't see America's Most Powerful, uh, uh, Chuck put up the playing cards, is that right, wrong, or indifference, that list, there's a ton
It
of
is there.
inaccuracy on that. But somebody would go, hey, that person lives right down the street. And guys look them up. Oh, that person lives right down the street. Yeah,
Yeah.
I could make some moves. I can make you
Well,
famous.
yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, again, that's why we go back and we talk about that. Look, I remember we first got in the industry, it was all about just arm's lengths. That's what it was. Of course, there were some defense in depth. You thought about those kind of things, situationally dependent, et cetera. MET-T, mission enemy, time terrain, um, or MET-TC if you want to be really cool. But then over time, then cyber became a thing. And everyone was like up in arms, like, how do we embrace that? And now that seems to be part of what we ask questions. And now we have this narrative, this cognitive aspect coming in, which I think is the third leg of that risk stool that we're going to be talking about and coming to grips with. And I think it's good for protection folks. It's good for CSOs. It's good for risk leaders to step back and say, what is the narrative about our company? What is the narrative about our executive? And it's kind of one of those things too, where I'd almost go on a limb here and say it's almost worth getting someone else to do that for you. Of course, you can do it internally, have your intel team if you're fortunate enough to have that, but it's almost it's almost worthwhile too to have somebody else come in and say, hey, here's what I need to understand, and I don't mean chat GPT or a generative AI doing this for you. I mean, have somebody, a human say, or an intel person or a red team analyst look at it and say, what is the counter narrative or what is the narrative about our company being done right now? And if you're in a big organization, what a great way to start a relationship with your comms team or your
Mm-hmm.
marketing team and
I
ask
think
those
the other thing
questions.
is just sharing, like, hey, asking, hey, what tools do you guys use? Do you have another
Yep,
license? Because then they go, well, why? Well,
exactly.
we look at the same threats, but we look at it through a security lens, or we look at the same information, we look at it from a security lens, not a marketing lens, right?
Yep.
And I think that part becomes very, very important as well.
And even if they don't have a license, here are some indicators that we look for. If you run across anything like that, would you send it our way? And then have that continued conversation. Start pulling that data from your internal key partners.
Yeah.
I mean,
So,
one thing for
you know,
go ahead.
it's not, I mean, I think people, maybe I'm wrong, but I think people look at it as it like binary, right? If then or yep, I should look at this, and then I should look at this, but it's actually all connected. Where do your threats come from? What is what tools you have in the organization. Can they if you don't have a license and they can't share a license, can you just share the report so I can have an
Yes.
understanding of what you guys are looking at? I mean, that part's easy, right? But again, it's not one all or nothing. It's all connected. And I guess that's what we're trying to say. There's interconnectivity between all this. It's very, very
Look,
important.
and let's be honest, we're in an asymmetric environment. I don't say that with tongue in cheek. I mean, look, we have what do we see after Mangione? What do we see after Bolter? What do we see after Kirk? Doxing. We saw now the threat, becomes comes over to the digital, the informational. So I mean, even after the incident happens, the first thing organizations need to be saying again, we should be able to look at our narrative and say, this is where we fit in the risk pie. Here's what's the potential issues and outcomes that could come from this. Let's immediately understand where we have with this, and then from that, like, do we have code words built in for anti-doxing with local PD? Do we, all these things that need to happen in order to know like what's the third and fourth and fifth orders of effect when there is some high level murder or high level assassination, to our groups. I mean, I think most people listening and watching probably get that, but I mean, we felt it was important enough to spend some time just talking about this issue now. I mean, Chris, let's kind of think about this. What might three things people should do right now? Just thinking about everything we've been talking about, organizations, leaders, or individual protection folks. What might three things be? One, for me, would be take stock of the narrative of your principal and your organization. That would be one for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the first one is, I think the very first one is to look at our profile and ask if we're our profile and then our associated profiles, right? Those associated risks, you know, if we are meeting the needs from a threat perspective, right? Like because that's what every CEO, CSO is probably going, hey, to their CSOs going, hey, what does it look like for us? And so you have to understand, what does it look like for us? Well, we're not cross domain. Our profile isn't very high. Here's the areas where we get the most friction or pushback, which gives you your direction for your risk treatments.
And that's probably likely number two. Number one, know your profile, know the narrative. Number two, know how to talk about it organizationally and to the principal. Because you're absolutely right. How do I define that now and make it something that I can get the principal to digest? And it's not just kind of like, man, it's crazy and you're here and we're concerned about snipers and we're concerned about, yes, we are concerned about those things.
Right.
But I think there's probably a way to read the room and have some, emotional intelligence or corporate emotional intelligence and have that conversation.
Yes.
And I might think a third might be like, let's examine our protocols. What are we doing? What are we normally doing? And and you're pretty good at this. Yes, everyone listening, I just gave Chris Story a compliment. Let's pause for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
Being
September 21st.
Constructively disruptive. Like, great, we're doing this. Why? Like, almost to me, this is a whiteboard situation or whatever, where you just put it up and say, let's break out how we manage a detail, whether it's an event or close protection, list it all out and say, is it working? Is it not working? What do we need to change? And then when you come back with it, we should be able to collectively, as a team, as an organization, as an individual, say, I feel good. Well, air quotes. I feel good about the way that we're approaching our detail work.
Yeah. Then the next question becomes, how do you know?
Yeah, I knew. I was waiting for that.
But you have
and
to,
it's true.
Right? You can't
That's the compliance piece. How do we know?
Yep, I'm good. Look,
but
my
I do think
sitting in the air and be like, yeah, we're straight.
But I do think there's a point for that too. You could take that out. You break it down into a spreadsheet. You could put it on a software or whatever to say, are we compliant with our internal protocols? and where we want them to be. And this isn't the standards argument. This is what we believe in as an organization we need to be doing. Here's how we know, and here's what we can state it back to.
Yep.
All good stuff. Well, what's anything coming up that you're at or about, or people can find you? I'll be at are you coming to
What, are you
GSX?
interviewing me?
No. I'm just thinking like I'll be at GSX. Tobin and I are doing something called Game Changer, where we'll be talking a little bit more about this at a GSX an event. I think that it's a new thing they're doing at like a center stage thing. Are you coming?
Nice. No, I will be traveling.
As one does.
Yes, as one does.
Well,
yep.
They'll if you're at GSX and you're able to make the Game Changer, come by and see me or see Mr. Tobin.
What's the hint? Can you give us a hint on what it's about?
Yeah, it's a lot of it's about the assassination culture, a lot of stuff we've been talking about here. I don't think this conversation is going away anytime soon. Pretty sure we're going to be talking about it again very soon with a guest that we've teed up. No spoilers on who, but I'm really looking forward to talking to her about this and her career and all that.
Yep. Good things.
Awesome. Anything else to think about before we put the lid on this one?
I think yes. So I think the events over the past weeks have really given cause for pause, right? Because you know at the same time you had the Charlie Kirk assassination, you had the two immigrants that were on the train, right? Or you know, the Ukrainian and I don't know who the other guy was, but you know, which was a stark example of like where we are, right, from a conflict perspective, right, and just kind of a crazy, like, what the hell is the world coming to kind of thing, right? Where it doesn't matter where you are, people are talking about it, and I think hopefully, specifically with both of those, it freaking like you said, causes people to communicate, and it pauses things because it's so, they're both so shocking, so relevant, and so raw that people are like having a hard time getting their minds around it and the why, right? And I think that, well, I say hopefully that'll give pause, but also I think that'll still continue, you know. But I think both of those incidents in one point we're just so, you know, everybody's just like pretty much dumbfounded, right? And then of course the results of those, right? Like the fallout of both of those events. So hopefully there's been some cold water like thrown on the flames.
I think it's a good reminder, if you're a leader, talk to, and I know we're all tough folks, we're all in security, but there is, I think, a moment to pause and talk about it. Like, what does this mean for us outside of like, we need to do more stuff? You know, if you're a parent or, you know, you have nieces and nephews or whatever, I mean, it's a good time to pause and have a conversation. Hey, you know, are you guys talking about this at school? How do you, you know, what are you thinking? What are we doing? I mean, just to help people, you know, figure out how to process it too. Because just seeing the video of Charlie Kirk, I mean, that, you know, if you're not in the industry, or you haven't, you know, been in combat, or you haven't witnessed something like that, it's shocking, you know. It's shocking. Awesome. Well, that, my friend, is good advice. With that, I think we'll move to close. This has been Conversations in Close Protection. My name is Chuck Randolph. Across the digital divide, the aeromedic, Mr. Chris Story. Wash your hands, watch your six, take a beat, have a conversation, and keep your heads down.
Good times.
You've been listening to an episode of Conversations in Close Protection. Email us at protectiontalk@outlook.com and find us on your preferred podcast platform. Please take a moment and consider rating us to help others find Conversations in Close Protection too. Look for us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and other social media spots. Conversations in Close Protection is brought to you by your hosts Chuck Randolph and Chris Story. Our engineering editor is the mighty Aaron Peck. Please remember that all opinions expressed do not represent those of any organizations or companies the hosts are affiliated with. This is Rachel saying watch your six and keep your heads down.
I was waiting for my cue.